I've already talked about conducting an experiment, and quasi-experiment, and then a correlational study. Now, if you go either of those routes, chances are you will wind up with quantitative data. So there's a separate section here about quantitative classroom research, and then the next one's going to be qualitative classroom research. And ultimately, that just refers to the kind of data that you're working with during your analysis. So an analysis is where you organize the data you collect into a meaningful scheme that helps you interpret what it means, kind of breaks your observation or your data collection down into the categories that are most important for understanding what it all says. So one way to do that is to break it down numerically. So ultimately, quantitative research is when you take, so in the classroom, you take human or child or student or teacher or institutional phenomena, which are whole processes, and abstract numbers from them. So for example, reading is a complex method of interpreting a bunch of black markings on a white background, and it involves syntax and semantics and the structure of language and meaning and grammar and so on. But we can abstract the reading process into any one of those categories, and we can even come up with a rating system in terms of how well the student does in executing each of those systems of reading. Now, you can't read without if you're missing any one of those parts of the reading process. So it wouldn't make sense to just focus on grammar, because you can't focus on grammar without the letters and the words and the punctuation. But what I'm trying to say is we can understand the structure of something, such as reading or even discipline or motivation, by breaking it down or abstracting from it smaller units. And one way to do that is to abstract numbers. So to say that someone has a 90% reading level, or even like an 11th grade reading level, doesn't really capture what reading is to that person, but it's a way to sort of understand what it means or compare it to other people who also read. So here are some examples of how you may quantify what you're interested in studying. So the score on a test, it could be a 90% or a 21 out of 25, or even an excellent or outstanding, provided there's a number attached to that. So an excellent might be a 5 on a scale between 0 and 5. In psychology, there's lots of quantifications of human phenomena. So personality is one, emotional intelligence is another, actual intelligence, so intellectual quotient is another. There's scales for development. There's scales for depression and anxiety. There's no limit to the number of scales that you can find, or inventories you can find in psychology. In the classroom, you may count something, like count behaviors, such as the number of absences a student has, or the number of perfect, or the number of days they've attended, the number of disciplinary sanctions they've received, the number of extracurricular activities they're involved in. It could be your annual teacher evaluation. Chances are you get some numerical score. I know I do as a college professor. I get an annual evaluation, and there's a target that we're shooting for, and the level of score we get on a 5-year rolling basis is important for whether or not we get promoted. It could be something organized on a pie chart or broken up into a 100% chart. And then you can also have like the results of a survey, like counting the number of responses you get for each yes or no, or in like a Likert scale type item where people are rating strongly agree to strongly disagree and everything in between. So I've got a couple of different examples of how you might collect quantitative data, and one of the most popular ways of doing this is to create a survey, because a survey you can create maybe 10 items, and you can distribute the survey virtually Google Forms is a popular way to do this. It's a really simple way to send out a lot of surveys electronically, and people can respond to the survey. You don't need to print them out and hand them out and then transpose all the responses. You can get the responses back and put them in an Excel file and analyze them that way. It's a really great way to collect a lot of data simply. But I want to caution you against just making up questions, because there are a lot of problems you can run into. So for example, I had a student who was interested in studying stress in elementary school kids, and she was working at an elementary school. So she had an in with the teacher. I think the teacher may have been her mom, and there was a way to get parent approval. So even though this was just for the purposes of learning, she still went through the assent process, which is really cool. But the survey she designed was problematic because she didn't have a clear definition of what stress meant, and she relied on these elementary school kids, their own understanding of what stress was. So questions were like, what do you think stress is? And so this open-ended response, and then like rate your score of stress on a scale between 1 and 5. So there was no agreement between what one student thought stress meant and what another student thought stress meant. Someone could have like extremely high levels of stress but think it's normal and say they have a 3 out of 5. Someone else might not have any stress comparatively but think that they're having a bad day and give themselves a 5 out of 5. So if you find a pre-existing survey, all of those knots have been unraveled, all of those kinks have been worked out, and there's probably an external validity study and an item validity study to make sure that if you're measuring anxiety, the results of the survey actually indicate anxiety and not something irrelevant. It's also very easy to design survey questions that are leading, that give you the results you hope to find. And a lot of times when we do survey development activities in class, I see a lot of leading questions. But it would take like months of practice to work through each of the kind of problems that survey items can have. So I recommend just find an existing survey. If you're interested in a survey for reading capability or mathematical skill or interest or emotional intelligence, there is a survey. There's probably 5 surveys for every topic you can think of. Save yourself the trouble and the external validity headache, and find a pre-existing one. A couple of the other types of data, quantitative data you might collect, could include an observational study. I've never done this, so I'm not sure. I can't come up with examples off the top of my head, and I don't think I've ever had a student do one either, but it was included in this Teacher's Guide to Research, which I haven't done a very good job of pointing out. I need to add this to the information of all these talks. I'm basing all of these topics on chapters from this book. Now, I interpret most of them my own way, based on my own experience, and I disagree a little bit with what the author Jonathan Firth has done, but for the most part I'm following the structure of this book. So if you're interested, you can do a deep dive into a lot of the topics I'm addressing from another person's perspective. So you're getting Dr. Whitehead's approach to all of this stuff. So I've never done an observational study, but I would recommend, if you're going this route, let's say you want to count the number of times that students are supportive of one another. So they go out of their way to be supportive of their peers. So you would have to come up with, I would recommend, you'd have to come up with a clear definition of what qualifies as support and what does not. And spend some time developing that so you know what it looks like when you see it. And then come up with a systematic schedule that you follow continuously, so you don't fall into the trap of, oh, people are being really supportive, I better start observing right now. That would be unsystematic, and it would draw your data collection into question. So come up with operational definitions, look that up if you don't know what that means, and then create a systematic schedule and stick to it. And it would be great if you introduce inter-rater reliability, which is when you describe to someone else what behavioral target they're looking for, and then both of you observe the same, maybe you videotaped it, you observe the same hour or whatever, 20 minutes, and you've got the same description of what qualifies as the target behavior, say social support of a peer, and you count how many times it happened and then compare your results. That way you're not just getting some random person's idea of what qualifies as social support. There's some agreement, and that agreement can actually be measured with a variety of inter-rater reliability scores. And so you can get like a percentage. There was 80% inter-rater reliability, which would be really strong. If there was like 12% inter-rater reliability or disagreement, then that would weaken the results that you get. Something common in inter-rater reliability calculations is the third rater, the tiebreaker rater. So let's say two people watch the same event. One person says, yes, that's social support. The other person says, no, that isn't social support. Well, then you bring in a third rater, and whatever they say is the direction that you go. But this has been done repeatedly. It's been shown that there's really no strength to the third rater. It's just as random as having one rater. You can create a computer program to provide random number tables, and if you apply the same rule, it just artificially boosts inter-rater reliability. So avoid that if you can. If you find low levels of inter-rater reliability, you should probably repeat whatever the procedure was and find some way of improving either the clarity of the observation or the definition of what you're looking for, or be more systematic with the procedure. Find some other way of strengthening the actual observational activity. As you can tell, I haven't done an observation, so my examples using observations are poor. I've done lots of inter-rater reliability, however, with my gen ed assessments at Albany State. All right, so this is my favorite part of quantitative research. It's almost the reason I do quantitative research, and that's to come up with some visual. Numbers can be visualized in a variety of ways. I've got a bar graph, pie chart, tables, box plot. I love all of these, and I go probably further than I need to in designing these for a lot of the articles and books and stuff that I write, and like blog posts and everything and videos, because I like visualizing data. You can show so much about a relationship. Oh, I didn't put another correlation graph in here, but you can show so much of a relationship between numbers or whatever phenomena you're looking at, abstracted into numbers using one of these visualization forms. If you do quantitative research, I highly recommend doing one or more visualizations of it, and that will help your reader understand, and maybe it'll help you better understand what you found, what the results were. Ultimately, an analysis is the way that you take raw data and turn it into something meaningful. So you do a classroom observation, you've got a bunch of numbers that you've counted of some target behavior, or you've got scores from a bunch of exams, or you've got personality inventories or emotional intelligence scores. All right, so you've got these numbers. What do they mean? What do they tell you in the context of different classroom intervention strategies? What's the takeaway? Well, the analysis is your way of clarifying what that takeaway is. The analysis can be done statistically, so you can actually run a test of statistical significance. If you find that group work improves emotional intelligence, are you sure that what you found, the result you found, is there was no error involved in that? So maybe the improvement of emotional intelligence is a rounding error. You made some sort of calculation error. You can actually calculate whether or not the difference between the previous emotional intelligence and then the after activity emotional intelligence, if the difference is statistically significant. So you can use a statistical t-test, analysis of variance. These are called mean comparison tests. I'm not going to go into how to do all of those because there are a million videos on YouTube. And if you're not versed in statistics, then I would probably, Well, I would encourage you to look at t-tests. If you're trying to see if a change is significant, if it's a change has occurred and you want to know if there was any probability of error, look up how to do a t-test. It's very easy. Analysis of variance gets more complicated, but t-tests are relatively straightforward, and they strengthen your results. It's a way of like checking. Let's say you get an answer. You want to make sure that the answer is reliable. A t-test is an excellent way to do that. So it just strengthens the work that you've done, helps you be more confident in what that result means. All of these visualizations are meaningless, in my opinion, if you don't also have tests of significance. So you want to know that the numbers that the bar graph and pie chart represent, or the box plot represents, then you want to actually do these extra steps. If that doesn't sound like something you're interested in doing, then maybe you want to focus on a qualitative study, which is what the next video will be about.